thought I'd start with, how do you find who can help you with your question or the problem that you may be experiencing? So just sort of some tips on navigating the broad range of the agencies that deal with environmental issues. So, first of all, you're all here today online. That's where, of course, we live a lot of our life nowadays. And definitely go surf the web a little bit. If you're not sure what agency or what kind of problem you have, or where within that agency you should find. And so there's, of course, at the state level, the Department for Environmental Protection, and that includes air, waste, water. There's a division of mining that permits those activities. There's also a division of compliance assistance for helping facilities comply with environmental regulations in a kind of more collaborative way. So there's all of these different agencies at that state level. And then there may be agencies or departments within your local government as well. So, for example, in Louisville, we have an air pollution control district. That's the only local air agency within the state. So outside of Jefferson County, air questions should definitely go to the Division of Air Quality. But if you're in Jefferson County, air pollution control district's a great place to start. But even once you find the right agency, drill down into that website. You can almost always find an org chart, and that, even if it doesn't have a specific person's name on it, may tell you, if I pick up the phone and call, what area of that agency might I want to speak to. So you can find out a lot just by looking at how an agency is structured. So again, for example, a Division for Air Quality, their permitting branch is broken down into things like the metallurgy section. So if you have questions about maybe an aluminum plant, that would be the place to go. Combustion, so that's all our coal burning electric plants, natural gas plants. So those kinds of information on an org chart can really kind of start narrowing down your search. But if nothing else, find that general line, give it a call. Person there, you describe, what kind of question you have. They're probably going to be able to help you find the right person. If you call, this is, I think, a theme throughout today, for better or worse. Agencies are made up of people, and you may get someone who is not as helpful on that first try. Try again. Maybe start at a different level within that agency, and someone there will help you find the right person, even if it's not within that department. I've fielded calls that ended up for our parks department or for solid waste, those kind of things. And, I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I can typically help someone find the person that does. And there's somebody like that in most all agencies and departments at any level of government, whether you're talking about local, state, or even federal. So really, sometimes it just helps to have that human on the other end, but those online resources can help you kind of navigate to closer to the right place. I'll also say that you may start with one organization, and you may find that that's not the place where your problem or your question can actually be addressed. So, be a little bit flexible with that and open to the next step being another contact. But one of the things that I would point out is that, emails can be really helpful. Phone calls nice because you are talking to a human on the other end, but sometimes email, especially once you start getting down to the kind of the right level that has the answers or the information or addresses the problem that you're calling about, that email can help create a record of your communication. So who you spoke to, when you reached out, and in general, what's the question or the information that you're requesting. And again, start with that general. Most any organization, all of them will have a general email address listed. So, at APCD, it's air@louisvilleky.gov. And that will reach, there's 3 or 4 people in our agency that goes to. And so between us, we kind of start fielding those emails and sending them out. So it's that's the point where you may reach air traffic control, and you'll get, shifted to the right place to answer your question. That's going to be more helpful if you're able to fairly clearly lay out that question or that concern in your initial communication. More likely to get you quickly to the place that you'll actually get your ultimate answer. And don't be afraid to ask, what should I do next? Especially if that is, if you haven't gotten the answer and you know that you still need some additional assistance, that person is asking, who should I contact next? Or if you reach out via email, ask them, if you're not the right person to answer my question, can you please refer me to who would be, or someone who would know?
Can I interject here?
Absolutely, please, Sarah Lynn.
I worked for 24 years for the public sector, and I would say the biggest challenge I faced when people called me with an environmental problem was it either didn't have a street address or they didn't know what it was. But people oftentimes call before they have thought about how to tell the person on the other end where the problem is. And it's amazing the number of people who couldn't tell me their zip code or whether they lived in Jefferson County and stuff like that. And with environmental problems, it's sometimes especially difficult because the problem doesn't have a street address. So I just want to encourage everybody to think before you call about how to tell the person on the other end where the problem is. And sometimes nowadays we have the benefit of Google Maps where you can see it and put your cursor there and get latitude and longitude, which can really help somebody help you because then they can see what you're talking about. The other tip I'll give is if I'm feeling awkward, which doesn't happen too often, but maybe the other person's feeling impatient or whatever, I'll start out by saying, I love to enter the weirdest question of the day contest. Would you like to hear my entry? And it usually makes them giggle, and then they're more open to me.
That's a good tip, because I think that kind of comes back around to, these are, human to human interactions here. And the more you can just personalize that, the more comfortable everybody's going to feel going into that. So I think those are great tips, Sarah Lynn. Absolutely agree with Sarah Lynn's advice. Gathering as much information as possible ahead of time will make that initial contact that much more productive. If you're reporting a problem, first of all, most, or I don't know if most, many agencies will have a reporting contact. And so again, that's something that if you can find that online resource, that may get you directly to that report a problem contact. If not, that's that main line. Call them and say, I have a problem to report, a environmental concern. If this is an air issue, you're going to say, I want to report an odor or dust or smoke, those kinds of things. And that's going to help that person get you right to the right person. And when you do make that contact, you really want to have as much clear information as possible. Remember, environmental agencies are very science-based, so they're going to need some facts and some data to work with in order to begin an investigation of the problem that you're reporting. So to the extent that you can answer questions in advance, what is it that is happening? What are you observing? How is it affecting you? I think that's whether that's a health effect or a quality of life nuisance impact, that helps kind of describe the problem, but then it also will help the person on the other end understand the issue, why this is a concern. This is not simply a happening in a vacuum. People are being affected here. That puts some weight behind the issue. I think that's important, again, to really bring that priority to the investigation that's about to begin. So when did this problem begin? Even if it's when you first noticed it, that may not have been when it initially happened, but you noticed this at a certain point. Is it ongoing? How long has this lasted? And is it a recurring problem? So, if this were an odor problem, is this something You notice nightly or every, day at noon, you start to smell something, that kind of thing. That can really help pinpoint what a problem is. Describe it as clearly as possible, is basically. And then the where, as Sarah Lynn said, that makes a huge difference because without that kind of information, you really can't start figuring out what's going on and how to resolve the issue, which is ultimately the point. So also, when you're reporting a problem, there's a lot of ways to do so. And a lot of those ways would allow you to do that anonymously. I would encourage you to consider providing your contact information whenever possible, because that really allows the person doing the investigation to contact you and follow up and ask some questions, again, about the things that we just talked about. So I know that can feel a little bit intimidating and maybe uncomfortable, but just remember that that's really, you are a primary data source in this investigation of an issue. With your information, it will go further and more quickly. So really consider heavily being kind of the resource for the agency that you contacted. And then find others. There's strength in numbers. Sarah Lynn, you had a finger up.
I wanted to embellish two of your points there. The first one is that nowadays we can take digital photographs and share them. Mm-hmm. So I would like to add to your definition of the problem or your documentation of the problem, take digital photos. When you submit them to an agency for their use, it's ideal to put it in the body of your email because some agencies don't allow their employees to open attachments for fear of viruses. So try to put it in the body of your note. And the other thing I wanted to say is that remember that people who work in civil service are not getting rich. They're there because they care. And you are protected. When you give them your information, that is protected. Without a court order, nobody can find out who you were. And again, this business of not being able to locate the problem, when I was doing environmental enforcement, I got my best tips from pissed off employees who were angry about what their bosses did. They got off work, they came home, and they called me, and they would be nervous, and they would tell me about the problem, and oftentimes they wouldn't tell me their name. And when I couldn't find it because they couldn't tell me specifically, I couldn't call them back to get the problem straightened out. So one of the things I did was that worked sometimes was to say, please give me a pseudonym, give me a fake name, and give me your phone number so that you could put me under court order and I don't know your name. And then that way, if I can't find it, I can actually call you and you won't just think I didn't care and ignored you. And that was pretty effective as well. So if you're afraid, the compromise is to offer a pseudonym.
That's a great point, Sarah Lynn. And also the point of providing photos. And, even though I'm in air world, there's actually many times when photos and video can be quite helpful, even when reporting air issues, particularly if it's dust or smoke. That can be difficult to get a photo. Believe me, I've tried. Sometimes it's really hard to get a photo of a dusty situation or a smoky situation because it just doesn't show up as well as what you're seeing. But if you can get anything like that, especially one that helps someone see the where, even if it doesn't fully capture the what, that can be really helpful.
And if you have a date stamp function on your camera, turn it on.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, a lot of nowadays, a lot of us are taking pictures on our cell phone. That comes with metadata. So that will be helpful because it will show if you turn your GPS on when you take the picture, it even has the location embedded in that file. So time, date, and where. And that can be really helpful. Know that often that kind of evidence is not going to necessarily be what the agency is able to use to enforce with or bring a case with because of, it wasn't taken by that agency, but it can be helpful in that investigation. It's going to get them to the point where that they can then get their evidence as needed. So that's a really good point, Sarah Lynn.
Thank you.
The other thing I would say is, to join forces. There's power in collective voice. So if you find others that are experiencing the same problem as you, that may be within a neighborhood group, or maybe not a neighborhood group, but even reaching out to a local elected representative, because they may have had other people contact them about the same issue, talking to just, maybe even at your church. Has someone else seen this or experienced this problem? Help those other folks make reports as well. There's a lot to be said with making the wheel more squeaky, so to speak. So that's important. And then also find others that have some expertise that might be able to help you gather more data. So university researchers are really, really a good resource, and more and more often are looking to have more of a tie-in with their communities. So they want to be a part of, the community's efforts to find resolution to their environmental problems, and then that gives them opportunities to do additional research and data gathering. So I know the University of Louisville has lots of different efforts in that regard. So between the Environment Institute and the U of L Superfund Research Center, those professors can be really helpful. And even if they can't necessarily pick up that cause, they can also direct you to people that they know that may have expertise in that area or resources. So don't be afraid to reach out to those folks, because they've worked a long time and really hard to get the expertise they have, and are often really happy to help apply that in their own community. So this is one that I just wanted to take some of that and put it into a more specific case. So this is just a little bit about reporting an objectionable odor in Louisville, but this would apply throughout the state. You'd just be talking to the Division for Air Quality instead of the Air Pollution Control District. So when you're reporting an odor, which may be indicative of a number of different environmental issues, again, be as specific as possible. Describe that odor as well as you can. Odors are really tough sometimes to describe, because we may get a report and someone says, for example, that they smell gas. Well, is that gasoline? Is that natural gas? Is that sewer gas? Is that some other odor that person may associate with the term gas? So the more descriptive you can be, the better, because it's going to help kind of pinpoint what the source of that odor might be. There's some things that you smell it, you know it. I smell manure, that kind of thing. So be really specific if you can, and be be honest with the intensity kind of question, because you may want to report again and find that if you say the first time it was the worst thing ever, the next time you report it's actually much, much worse. That doesn't necessarily help your issue get prioritized anymore than it would otherwise. It's going to be investigated either way. And again, I wanted to reemphasize something that Sarah Lynn pointed out on earlier, and that is, as a complainant, your identity is confidential for Open Records Act requests. So, for example, when we get an Open Records request for all complaints made in a certain zip code, or all odor complaints made related to a certain facility, the information that's provided does not include the complainant's name, phone number, address, contact information at all. It may be discoverable in a legal action. So that is a different level of information request. It's not, but it is also within a specific court proceeding. So it's not quite the same as that public information that is released under the Kentucky Open Records Act. Yes, Sarah Lynn.
I was going to add, in my 5.5 years of running an environmental enforcement program where we were prosecuting in court dozens of cases, I never had anybody do an open records request or a subpoena for the complainant's name and number.
Yeah.
Now, that's dated information. Maybe they do it now, but you know, it has a bad look. The judges wouldn't appreciate it. The TV crews, if you call them in, are not going to appreciate a polluter, which is how they would be portrayed in the news, harassing a citizen. So I just don't. I mean, people say I'm too brave, but I really think that there's reason to be brave.
I agree. And I can't, don't do the enforcement work specifically, so I can't say whether that has ever happened. It's not something that I have seen myself. So, you know, I can second Sarah Lynn, but that would be fairly unusual.
And stupid.
Yeah, I agree. So the little image there at the bottom is just an example of one way that you can kind of keep some data and tracking of an issue. This is something we created to help people track odors. We encourage people to report all odors when they experience them. And the link there to the APCD odor workshop has a whole section on the myriad ways that we have at APCD to receive odor complaints, everything from pick up the phone and call us to there's an app for that. So all of those ways get the information to us the same, but it can be helpful, especially for the individual, to be able to keep track of the frequency, the duration, all of those things for themselves, and then be able to, you know, rely on that to present that and look, this is what I have experienced. This is a record of what is happening where I live. And you can find resources like that online, but you can also just, you know, a notebook, jot it down. Did you report it? When did you report it? Those kind of things. So that's just kind of a helpful way to keep that information.
Can I embellish on that one?
I love it. Yes.
Okay, good.
Marilyn and I are a team package here.
Thank you. I want to emphasize the business of keeping a log. It is super helpful. And just to illustrate why it needs to be detailed, if you called me when I was working at the health department and you said there was this rotten egg odor, and it happened periodically, that's really not that helpful because there's usually more than one type of wastewater infrastructure in a neighborhood. But if you kept a log and you told me the date and the time, if it's always early in the morning or late at night, then I know it's probably the sewage treatment plant because the air is heavier in the morning and the evening when the sun's going down, and that synchronization tells me what's going on. If instead you tell me it's usually like 10 o'clock in the morning or noon, then I think it's probably a pump station. So just giving me that detail, and if you show me the I think the word is period, I can't even say it, the periodic nature of it, it really helps you to figure out what's going on. So please take those kind of details seriously because this is detective work.
Yeah, that it is. It feels a little bit like you're, you know, you need a Sherlock Holmes beside you. That's an excellent example of why those details really do help that investigator start getting to the source and the cause of your concern. Yeah.
Thank you for letting me interrupt you.
I can say tag team works well. Okay, so just sort of moving on away from reporting an issue, but just to generally finding information. Kind of going back to that, go back to those websites. I know at APCD we have a expansive website. There's tons of information on there. We're working on making it better organized so to find it, because sometimes it just feels like, oh, there's you're just jumping into the deep end of the pool at times. But there really is a lot of information out there on the web, and that includes things like webinars and training resources. So we have a workshop series at APCD. There's a link to one of those on the last slide, and we've pulled that throughout the year, but it may be a one-time event, but all of the resources for that are then posted on the website. So even if you're not there or you didn't know about it at the time, you can find a lot of training and information resources on agency websites just from their outreach and engagement efforts. But then, of course, there are reports. There's annual reports. Our board meets monthly, and every month there are reports on from air monitoring data, compliance and enforcement efforts. All of those are posted online, and there's a lot of information there. Permits are posted online. So not certain all levels of permits at the state that are posted online, but the largest facilities, what we call in the air world Title V facilities, their permits are posted online. And at APCD, we also post the next level down, which are also large facilities, but they take limits. They're called FEDUs. That's my favorite acronym because it's the silliest sounding acronym you could come up with. Those are federally enforceable district originating operating permits. It's a mouthful, so FEDU's just more fun to say. But those are posted online along with summaries of those permits. So that can really help you, especially if you are having concerns about a facility that's operating in your area. Now, they are still very technical. They're still very dense, but that can kind of help you start narrowing down the questions that you may ask when you pick up the phone or reach out via email to one of those agency contacts. Also, public notices and postings of proposed actions. Those are really, really important. Typically will include contact information. So if you see a publicly noticed permit at APCD, you'll see in there for more information or copy of the permit, contact, we'll say Matt King in Louisville, which is, I'll claim that as my husband, but he fields questions all the time from people who call and we'll have some questions about a public notice permit because maybe it's in their neighborhood or something that they just are interested in. And just pick up the phone and call him and he'll sit and talk to you and tell you whatever he can to answer those questions about that. So those are really helpful starting points for finding some more information. Again, reach out for help, as I say. Agencies are full of people who have a lot of expertise and they're happy generally to share that. If that first person that you contact isn't happy to share that with you, try again. There's going to be somebody that is. And I say that just to encourage people to keep trying. But to be honest with you, most people I know at agencies are really happy to talk to you about their work. We do this work all day long, and sometimes it feels like nobody knows what we're doing out there. So when somebody calls and is interested, it's great to be able to share some information.
I think that Matt, though he's an engineer, isn't he?
He is.
Matt is quite capable of speaking in plain English, which is super important, which reminds me that like all area of the world, we speak in a lot of jargon.
Yes.
And sometimes we forget to translate into English. And so you're not going to shock us or alienate us or insult us if you say, excuse me, what was this term you just used? And, prompt them to go, I'm sorry, that stood for federally enforced, blah, blah, blah. So just, we know that we talk funny and we sometimes forget. So feel free to interrupt them and say, you just left me in the dust. What's that term mean? Because they don't want to leave you in the dust. They just forgot that they weren't speaking clearly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The jargon isn't there to confuse or to create barriers. It's there just because we do operate in this very heavily regulated realm. We operate in a realm of lots of science and technology, and there may be chemical names and pollutants that in our day-to-day speak, we're shorthanding. That becomes a habit, and sometimes we don't hear it. So yes, please don't ever hesitate to say, what was that again? Can you explain what you just said? Or I don't know what that acronym means. Please say that, because we remind each other. Right. I do that all the time, and I always ask people to remind me when I've done it because we just don't hear it anymore. And then lastly, I'll just say that stay informed with the agencies that you're interested in. We all have email listservs. Sign up for those notifications. Those public notices, they go out in emails. Where required, well, I will say legislature in Kentucky did pass a law a couple years ago that agencies are no longer required to public notice in newspapers, in print. We still do in Louisville, but to be honest with you, I think that the emailed public notice is far more effective for most people. I do still see sometimes people ask questions. They saw something in the public notices of the CJ, but those emails have links that you can click on. They'll have a contact information, And that's just a good way to stay up to date. And that's also going to be how you can hear about things like workshops or public meetings on topics that may not even be required to be public noticed. So things like our Clearing the Air workshop series, we send those out. We also will, send out information that's important and related to issues that we know Air Pollution Control District followers would be interested in. There's a lot of agencies with Facebook pages and Twitter feeds. If you're on those social media platforms, follow and like them there, because that's a really good resource for finding out what's going on and where are the opportunities that you have to come in with comments or feedback to that agency. We have a monthly board meeting at APCD that has a public comment section every single month that people can come in and make a comment to our board, which is our regulatory body, and be heard and be put on the record. So that can be on any air quality issue. It doesn't have to be a current pending action at all. Sarah Lynn?
This is slightly off your point, but not too far. In my years, I don't know of a single public agency that has all the staff it needs to do its statutorily assigned duties. Everybody is short-staffed. So if you talk to somebody in a public agency who says, it might be a week or two before we can get to it or whatever, it's perfectly fine to say, how can I help? They're probably not going to say, please write the legislature, please write the mayor, the governor, whatever. But I'm going to tell you, letting your elected officials know that you support these agencies and you want them properly funded so they can really do their job is extremely helpful. I can't speak to the local agencies, but the state environmental agencies have had a budget cut every year. I'm losing track, but for at least 16 years. You can't do that and spend more money on retirement and healthcare and expect these people to do their jobs. And they're not in an ideal position to beat on the elected officials to budget for these services. So that's kind of our citizens' job to do nowadays.
And often doing more. There's often unfunded mandates on the federal level. So, just as a specific example, in the realm of air pollution, this is true at the state as well as in Louisville, there are additional air monitoring requirements. Often those come without additional funding from the federal government, but the Clean Air Act mandates that they be done. Or they may come with some funding for initial equipment purchase, but not for the ongoing staff that is needed to support that equipment, to analyze the data, to report that data. So that's a really good point. So we've talked a little bit about open records. So these are just a couple of tips here. First of all, remember that when you do an open records request, it is a request for records. Those are existing records. Agencies are not required to create new records if you're asking for information that is not in a record format that they can produce. So the more specific you can be about what records contain the information you're looking for, the better the response to your records request is going to be. So if you're requesting information about a facility or about something that has occurred in a specific location, be as specific as you can with an address or with a company name. Always include that information. If possible, always include a date or a date range. If you were to request open records on, even if you request a specific reporting form, for example, annual reports for Louisville Gas and Electric Mill Creek facility. Well, that may sound like a very specific request, but Mill Creek facility has been operating since the 70s, and you don't want all of the, well, unless you do want those, just be prepared. If you want all of those in annual records, it's going to take a long time to get that information back because there's more to look through, more to sift through for that records manager. And also, for some instances, you may be asking for records that have been sent to an archive facility. So then those have to be pulled, and that's going to take even longer when all you really wanted to know about was the last 5 years. If you specify a date or a date range, you're going to get a much more specific response. You're not going to be looking for the needle in the haystack because you haven't been given the haystack. You've just been given the pieces that you really want. If you don't know what kind of records you want, again, that's where sometimes those conversations with people that work at the agency can be really helpful. Many times we'll have conversations with someone who wants specific information, and I'll say, an open records request for this document is going to gives you that specific answer that you want. Or if you're asking about a specific facility, ask for the annual emissions report or for a specific compliance report. That's just really helpful because then you know what to ask for and you're going to get it much more quickly. I put a couple of links up on this page, and these are specific to Louisville Metro government, but there are open records pages on the state DEP site. When you just go to their Department of Environmental Protection webpage, right up in the top right corner, there's a link about open records requests for them. In Louisville Metro government, we now have just this year an online open records request system that seems to be working really well for folks. I actually haven't heard any complaints about this system. So that's anytime we implement a new electronic system and there's not complaints about it, that's a major win. Or it actually works. We've all probably seen on the news about the state's vehicle registration new database problems. That can be a real challenge, but this seems to be a really useful, user-friendly interface where you put your information right into an online portal and we'll get your records returned electronically on. And typically that's how most open records requests are returned, unless they are incredibly expansive and you need to come in and view paper documents. So that's certainly not a problem. That you can do that, and then maybe you'll find what you need within a large review of paper documents, and then you can request copies of those specific records. So again, that date range, specificity, and the more tailored your request, the better. But one thing I wanted to point out, because this is something that that's just happened, and a lot of agencies, as I was clicking through different open records pages, haven't even updated the information on their website yet. In the 2021 legislative session, there was some legislation passed that increased the time period that public agencies are required to respond to open records requests within from 3 to 5 days. Now, I want to point out, if you have a large open records request, that doesn't mean you're going to get the entire response to your request within that time frame. But they are required to respond to you with confirmation that it was received and with a date when you will receive it. So I know at APCD, I work quite a bit with our records manager. Almost always, if you're asking for records that we already have digitized and you've got a specific request, those records can typically be returned within that previously 3, now 5-day time frame. All of our requests do go through the Louisville Metro Office of Management and Budget, so sometimes that adds a day to how quickly they're able to go because they go from us to them and then to the requester. But we always strive to meet that regulatory time frame. But sometimes very large requests, especially things that we have to get pulled from archives or things that may be even on site but they aren't digitized yet, so they require us to do some scanning in order to return that, we'll respond with been received. It will usually include a reason why. It will take longer, and you'll receive a response in somewhere, maybe a week to 2 weeks out from there. I put a link into this slide for more information about those 2021 updates because there is some additional information in there. There's a required form that the Attorney General developed that all agencies are required to offer on their website. It's fine. It has the basic information in there, but if you're looking at, for example, like Louisville Metro Government open records request, using that portal is probably going to be an easier way for you to request those records. It's going to include all the information that's on that form and probably more as well. But there is a form out there that's standardized that can be used. So if you're looking for data, that might not be a record. That might be an online data portal. So I just wanted to include this with some links to some mostly national, but there's a little bit of local in here. But EPA resources can get you a lot of data. And that first one, EJ Screen, is a really great tool because it combines data sets that include everything from demographic data to data from air, water, and land, hazardous waste permitting facilities. So you can find a lot in EJ Screen all in one place. And that's location-based. It's a mapping tool. So you can see proximity to different types of environmental permitted facilities or environmental hazards or brownfields and Superfund sites. All of those kinds of data resources are combined into the EJ Screen platform, and it's fairly user friendly. There's a lot of user assistance resources on the EPA website. So, and then keep your eyes peeled, especially when you sign up for those listservs. EPA has listservs as well that you can sign up for, because there's often webinars and training sessions on how to use EJ Screen. We've held some of those in Louisville, but EPA does that a couple times a year. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That's another reason to follow some of those environmental advocacy groups, because they post things like that. And like we know that today's session was posted by a group, and they get the word out. So look for those. ECHO, EPA's Enforcement and Compliance History online website. That includes enforcement actions across a wide range of media. That's not just air pollution enforcement. There's water, there's waste management enforcement there too. So you can look up by facility to see what kind of enforcement and compliance history that facility may have. This can add weight to comments that you may make to an agency or to reaching out for assistance. Again, adds information to and context to the issue that you need to talk about. More specific to air pollution is the National Emissions Inventory facilities, those large Title V facilities that I talked about. They're required to report annually their emissions, and every 3 years, those are reported up to EPA, and they create a national emissions inventory. So, and it takes them about 3 years to put that out. So the most recent complete emissions inventory right now is the 2017 emissions inventory, but the 2020 will be coming out in a couple of years. They're already starting to work on that. So that can really help you understand what pollutants are being emitted by a facility and who are maybe the largest emitters of that pollutant. And I just discovered that EPA has a dashboard now that helps you explore that, and it's much more user-friendly than downloading just megabytes of Excel data spreadsheets. That's a link to that to explore. And APCD has a dashboard for the Louisville Metropolitan Statistical Area. So that MSA is Jefferson County, the surrounding counties, and actually a couple of counties out from that in many instances. And that dashboard, again, it just helps you kind of click through. You can search by county, you can search by pollutants, kind of drill down into that NEI. The NEI also includes emissions that are modeled for mobile sources and for the sources that don't are stationary but don't report directly. So a lot of those smaller sources. They're modeled, but they're modeled based on some pretty decent guesses. It gives you an idea of, like, for example, in Louisville, it would give you an idea of what the magnitude of contribution is from some of our maybe industrial facilities versus mobile sources. So it's just a really good way to get a big picture of information, but also then to be able to drill down into specific facilities. And then the toxics release inventory, that's a national EPA database. That TRI, that includes air emission reporting, but it also includes releases to water and to waste and land facilities as well. And it is specific. It includes toxics that may not be included in some other types of reporting. So the TRI is a great resource. That TRI data, along with NEI, I don't have a link to this, but also contribute to the National Air Toxics Assessment, which is a risk-based assessment of air quality. So these are really important resources, great for data. But this is just a few. There's a lot of resources out there online. And again, I keep coming back to ask the people that work in these agencies where you can find more data, because they probably know about these resources. They probably use them themselves. Sarah Lynn, anything to add on those?
I did, but I already forgot what it was.
Uh-oh. Shoot.
It's all right. It was on
Well,
the previous slides, and it must not have been that important, or I'd remember it.
my last slide then is just a few more links to some additional resources. These a little bit Louisville specific, but I also have included the Division for Air Quality and EPA's links. And we are within Region 4 of EPA, the state of Kentucky. So their headquarters are down in Atlanta, but the staff in the regional offices, they're much more familiar with the specific issues of the states. They have staff that are assigned to different states within the region. So if you are contacting EPA, I really suggest you start with the region office because they're going to be closer to the issue and more familiar with the facilities, with the types of activities that are happening in all of the states. That's the end of those slides. Oh, and on the right of that slide, just some of APCD's programs that I always have to include in anytime I talk because we have some good ones out there. So CARE is Kentuckiana Air Education. We're online, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. That's a great organization to follow for air quality alerts in Jefferson County and the surrounding area. We have those a few times through the summer, typically for ozone. Lawn Care for Cleaner Air and Grow More Mow Less are great ways to reduce our own personal contributions to air pollution through our lawn care activities. Gasoline-powered lawnmowers can contribute a lot of ozone precursors as well as air toxics, and they are also sources of greenhouse gases. So Lawn Care for Cleaner Air provides rebates on electric equipment, which is much cleaner and less polluting. But of course, if you don't need to grow grass at all to mow, how about you grow something different? That's Grow More, Mow Less, and that's the idea there. So from ground covers to trees, there's lots of other things to plant that do a lot of other good work for us and don't need to be mowed. Most of us have our lawns using us more than we use them. So get out there and plant something different. On that, I'm going to say, Sarah Lynn, take it away because I know you have some great advocacy tips for us.
Thank you, Michelle. And going first is the hardest job. You make mine much easier. So thank you very much.